The small town had a large courthouse in the center, and inside that building sat a man who controlled almost everything. His name was Judge Rohan. He wore fine clothes, spoke with a strong voice, and looked at people as if they were smaller than him. People in the town feared him, not because he was fair or wise, but because he was proud and never cared about the truth. He liked to remind others that he held power, and no one dared to argue with his words. Many times villagers entered the courthouse with hope in their eyes, thinking they would find justice. But after facing Judge Rohan, they left with disappointment. He gave decisions that often favored the rich and ignored the poor. If someone tried to explain their side, he would cut them off with sharp words. It was as if he enjoyed showing people that he was always right. The townspeople whispered about him in the markets and on the streets, but no one had the courage to stand against him. They feared that if they upset him, he would make their lives more difficult. Some people even believed it was better to stay silent than to suffer his anger. And so for many years, Judge Rohan sat in his chair, acting as though the town was his kingdom. In this same town, a woman named Mira worked quietly. She was a maid in one of the big houses near the courthouse. Mira was humble, hardworking, and never complained about her life. She cleaned, cooked, and served with patience even when others looked down on her. Mira had only one reason to keep going every day: her little daughter, Anya. Anya was a bright-eyed girl with a curious mind. Even as a child, she asked questions about everything she saw. Why were some people treated kindly and others treated poorly? Why did some children go to school while she had to wait for her mother to return from work before learning from borrowed books? Mira often told her daughter that the world was not always fair, but she encouraged her to study whenever she could. Although they lived in a small, broken house with only a few belongings, Anya filled the space with her energy. Every evening, after finishing her chores, she sat under the dim light of a lantern and read whatever books she could find. Sometimes neighbors gave her old school materials. Sometimes Mira brought home papers that others had thrown away. Anya never complained about the lack of new books or proper pencils. Instead, she used every chance to learn, writing on scraps of paper and memorizing lessons quickly. There were nights when Mira felt tired and hopeless. She wondered if her daughter's dreams were too big for their situation. But when she saw Anya's determination, she found strength again. She told herself that if she kept working, maybe her daughter's future would be different. Meanwhile, Judge Rohan's pride continued to grow. People bowed to him and he liked the respect, though it came from fear. He believed no one in the town had the courage or knowledge to ever question him. He looked at the poor as if they were invisible, never realizing that in the quiet corners of his own town, a young girl was preparing to challenge everything he stood for. One afternoon, as Mira cleaned the halls of the large house, she overheard the owners talking about the judge. They laughed about how he always sided with them in disputes and how no one dared to oppose him. Their words stung her, but she said nothing. She only thought of Anya, and how she prayed her daughter would one day rise above the unfairness of such people. That evening, when Mira returned home, she found Anya reading with great focus. She looked at her daughter's face, glowing with determination even in the weak light, and felt a quiet hope in her heart. Perhaps she thought change could come not from the powerful, but from someone humble who believed in truth. The town carried on under Judge Rohan's shadow, but within the small home of a maid, a story was beginning. It was the story of a child who would grow into someone strong, someone who would not bow down, and someone who might one day stand in front of the arrogant judge without fear. Anya grew day by day, and with every passing year, her love for learning only became stronger. The small lantern in their little home was her closest companion at night. When other children in the neighborhood played outside, Anya often sat with her books, writing notes and asking her mother endless questions. She wanted to understand the world, not just accept it the way it was. Mira noticed how different her daughter was. Most children in their street dreamed of working in shops or fields when they grew older. But Anya spoke about schools, colleges, and even the big city libraries she had only heard of. Whenever Mira tried to remind her about their simple life, Anya smiled and said she wanted to work hard for a future where people could live with fairness. Money was always a problem. Mira's income as a maid was barely enough to cover food and rent. Buying books or paying school fees felt impossible. But kindness came from unexpected places. One day, an old teacher in the neighborhood saw Anya reading a torn grammar book. He was surprised by her interest and asked her a few questions. When he saw her sharp answers, he decided to give her free lessons in the evenings. From that day, Anya had someone to guide her properly. The teacher, named Ravi, was patient and wise. He had retired many years earlier, but he still loved teaching. With his help, Anya not only improved in reading and writing, but also started to understand subjects like history and mathematics. Mira could not believe how her daughter's mind absorbed so much. She often said that Anya's hunger for knowledge was greater than hunger for food. Despite the new lessons, life was not easy. There were days when Mira fell ill from overwork, and Anya had to manage chores alone. There were days when their roof leaked during heavy rains and books nearly got ruined. But none of these struggles stopped her. She dried her wet notebooks under the sun and copied the blurred words all over again. She kept believing that every page she studied was a step toward a brighter future. Judge Rohan, however, continued to live in comfort. His name had become a symbol of fear in the town. People often warned each other not to speak against him. Whenever he walked through the marketplace, shopkeepers lowered their eyes and greeted him politely. Children were told to behave whenever he passed by. Rohan enjoyed this respect, believing it was a sign of his greatness, not realizing it was born out of fear. Years passed, and Anya reached her teenage years. By now, her dream had grown clearer. She wanted to become a lawyer. She wanted to stand in courtrooms, not as someone afraid of the judge's voice, but as someone who could speak the truth. When she shared this dream with her mother, Mira felt both proud and worried. She asked how someone like them, with no wealth or family name, could ever reach such a place. But Anya simply said that hard work was stronger than money and truth was stronger than fear. Ravi, her teacher, also encouraged her. He told her stories of famous lawyers and how they had fought for justice. He reminded her that every great person had started as an ordinary child, but it was their courage and persistence that took them ahead. His words gave Anya even more energy to move forward. The town slowly began to notice her as well. Neighbors admired how she studied while others wasted time. Some offered her old books. Some allowed her to sit quietly in their courtyards when she needed peace. Mira realized that while life was still hard, small hands of support were being extended toward her daughter. But in the courthouse, Judge Rohan continued to act as if nothing in the world could change him. He dismissed poor people's pleas and gave decisions that favored those who could flatter him. He never imagined that one of the little girls running around the streets outside would one day grow into someone bold enough to face him. One night, when the town was quiet and stars covered the sky, Anya sat with her books spread on the floor. She looked at her mother and said softly that one day she would return to this town as someone different, not as the maid's daughter, but as a person who could bring fairness. Mira listened and smiled, though her eyes filled with tears. She held her daughter close and prayed silently for her dream to come true. What neither of them knew was that this dream would one day lead them into the very courtroom where Judge Rohan sat. And in that place a battle would begin, not with anger or force, but with intelligence and courage. The years rolled on, and Anya's childhood slowly turned into youth. She was no longer the small girl who read under a lantern. She had now become a young woman with strong determination in her eyes. Her heart carried the same dream she had spoken of so many times before. She wanted to stand for justice and use her knowledge to help people who had no voice. Mira worked harder than ever. She took extra hours in the houses where she cleaned, saving small amounts whenever possible. She never told her daughter how much pain her back and arms felt after long days. She wanted Anya to study without fear of money. Every coin saved became a small stone in the foundation of her daughter's future. Anya, on the other hand, did not waste a single minute. She joined a local school when a kind neighbor offered to pay part of her fees. The teachers quickly noticed how bright she was. While many students studied only to pass exams, Anya studied to understand. She asked thoughtful questions, sometimes even surprising her teachers with her clear thinking. At the school library, she discovered a new world. Rows of books stood on wooden shelves filled with ideas, stories, and lessons from the past. Anya read about law, history, and famous leaders who had fought for fairness. She admired how some lawyers had spoken boldly against unfair judges, and how their words had changed lives. She often imagined herself standing in a courtroom, holding papers in her hand, speaking with confidence while everyone listened. Though she loved learning, the path was not smooth. Some classmates looked at her with doubt. They whispered about her being just the maid's daughter. They wondered how someone like her could dream of becoming a lawyer. Anya heard those words, but she never let them break her spirit. Instead, she used them as fuel to work harder. She believed that her actions would one day answer all the doubts. Her teacher Ravi remained by her side as a guide. Whenever she faced confusion in her studies, she went to him for help. He explained patiently, reminding her that knowledge was like a lamp in darkness. The brighter it became, the easier it was to see the right path. Ravi also taught her about discipline, saying that talent alone was not enough. A person needed patience and hard work to achieve great goals. At home, the evenings were filled with study. Mira cooked simple meals while Anya read aloud, practicing speeches as if she were already in court. Sometimes Mira smiled and teased her, asking if she was arguing with invisible judges. Anya laughed but continued practicing because she wanted her voice to be strong, steady, and convincing. One summer, a group of lawyers visited the town for a small seminar in the local school. Anya attended with excitement. She listened carefully as they spoke about their experiences. After the session, she gathered courage and asked one of them how someone without money or background could become a lawyer. The lawyer looked at her kindly and said that the law was meant for everyone who had the will to learn. He advised her to apply for scholarships when the time came. His words lit a fire in her heart. Meanwhile, Judge Rohan's rule in the courthouse continued unchanged. He gave orders that pleased the wealthy, and he dismissed the cries of the weak. The people of the town had grown used to his ways, believing that nothing could be done. Rohan himself had grown older, but his arrogance had only deepened. He believed his chair was untouchable, that no one would ever dare to challenge him. But far away from his grand courtroom, in a small home with cracked walls, a young girl was preparing for that very challenge. She dreamed not only of becoming a lawyer, but of becoming a voice that could stand up even against someone like Rohan. As her school years came to an end, Anya scored high marks in her exams. Her teachers praised her, and her mother's eyes filled with pride. With Ravi's guidance and the support of a scholarship, Anya gained admission to a law college in the city. It was a moment she had imagined countless times, yet when it finally came, it felt unreal. On the day she left for the city, the whole neighborhood gathered. Some wished her luck. Some gave her small gifts like notebooks or pens. Mira stood quietly, holding her daughter's hand tightly. She felt both joy and sadness. Her little girl was stepping into a larger world, one filled with opportunities and challenges. Anya promised her mother that she would work hard and return as someone who could bring pride not only to her family, but also to the town. With determination in her heart and hope in her eyes, she stepped onto the path that would shape her destiny. What awaited her in the city was unknown, but she carried within her a strength that no hardship could break. Life in the city was very different from the small town. The buildings were taller, the streets were busier, and the people moved quickly as if every moment mattered. For Anya, it was both exciting and overwhelming. She had never been in such a place before, but she reminded herself why she was there. She had come to study law, and no distraction could turn her away from that goal. The law college where she studied was full of students from many backgrounds. Some came from wealthy families, dressed in expensive clothes and carried the latest books. Others came from middle-class homes and worked hard to keep up. Anya stood among them as the maid's daughter, but her sharp mind and strong will made her stand out. At first, some students did not take her seriously. They assumed she could not keep pace with them. But when classes began and professors asked questions, Anya's clear and confident answers surprised everyone. She read every book given in class, stayed late in the library, and even studied old cases to understand how justice worked in real life. Slowly, respect replaced doubt, and her classmates began to see her not as someone ordinary, but as someone exceptional. The professors also noticed her effort. One professor named Arvind often praised her in front of the class. He said she had the spirit of a true lawyer, someone who did not only memorize rules but also understood the purpose behind them. His words encouraged her to keep pushing forward, even when the workload seemed heavy. Meanwhile, in her small town, Judge Rohan's arrogance was growing. The people still bowed before him in fear, and he believed nothing could shake his position. He gave unfair decisions with ease, not realizing that in the city the maid's daughter was preparing herself to return as a strong voice. During her years in college, Anya faced many challenges. She did not have money for extra books or personal tutors, but she found ways to make up for it. She worked part-time in the library, where she gained access to more materials. She borrowed books from seniors and copied notes late into the night. She lived in a small hostel room with plain furniture, but she kept it neat and filled with books and papers. For her, knowledge was wealth, and every page she read brought her closer to her dream. In the courtroom training sessions arranged by the college, Anya's talent shone brightly. She stood before mock judges and argued cases with such clarity that her classmates often clapped at the end. Her voice was steady, her words were strong, and her points were clear. Many said she looked like a professional already, though she was still a student. But she never forgot her roots. On weekends, she wrote letters to her mother, telling her about classes, exams, and the city life. Mira kept those letters safely, reading them again and again with pride. She shared them with neighbors, saying that her daughter was on the path to becoming someone who could change lives. The years passed, and Anya completed her degree with excellent grades. She had not only studied law, but had also developed the confidence to stand in any courtroom. With the help of a scholarship, she joined a well-known legal firm in the city to gain practical experience. There she worked under senior lawyers, learning how real cases were handled. She saw how evidence was collected, how arguments were built, and how justice was defended step by step. She quickly became known for her sharp mind and honest approach. Clients trusted her and seniors respected her. Yet deep inside, Anya never forgot the image of her hometown courthouse in the face of Judge Rohan, who ruled with pride and injustice. She knew her real mission was not just to succeed in the city, but to return to her town and bring fairness where it had been missing for so long. Back in the town, nothing had changed. Judge Rohan still gave biased judgments. Poor people still suffered in silence, and the rich still laughed in private about how easy it was to win cases under him. No one had dared to rise against him. But the time was coming when someone would, and that someone was no longer the maid's little daughter studying under a lantern. She was now an educated, confident attorney ready to stand in front of him, not with fear, but with truth. After completing her training in the city, Anya finally decided it was time to return to her hometown. The memories of her small house, her mother's tired smile, and the stories of unfair judgments were always in her heart. She had learned much in the city, but she knew her real journey was only beginning. When she stepped back into the town, people looked at her with surprise. They remembered her as the maid's daughter who once studied under a weak lantern. Now she returned as a young woman dressed in neat professional clothes, carrying files and books with confidence. Many whispered among themselves, amazed at how far she had come. Mira could not stop her tears when she saw her daughter again. She held Anya tightly, remembering the days of sacrifice, long hours of work, and endless prayers. For her, this moment was more precious than anything. She told everyone proudly that her daughter had become an attorney. Neighbors gathered, curious and excited. Some even said it was like a story from a book, where a humble girl grew up to achieve the impossible. But not everyone was happy. Judge Rohan heard about her return. At first, he dismissed it with a laugh. He told others that no young attorney could stand against him, especially not the maid's daughter. He believed his years of authority and influence were far stronger than her education. In his mind, she would never be able to touch his power. Anya, however, was not interested in his opinions. She focused on her work. She opened a small office in town, simple but neat, with a wooden desk, a few chairs, and shelves filled with her law books. At first, people were unsure if they could trust her. Many still believed no one could win a case against the judge. But slowly, small cases came her way. Her first few clients were poor villagers who had long been ignored. They came with hope in their eyes, though they were afraid of what might happen if the judge grew angry. Anya listened carefully to their problems, wrote down every detail, and assured them she would do her best. When she represented them in court, her clear voice and strong arguments surprised everyone. Though the judge tried to dismiss her words quickly, people noticed that she spoke with more knowledge and confidence than anyone had expected. News spread quickly through the town. People began to say that the maid's daughter was not ordinary anymore. They whispered that she had the courage to speak where others stayed silent. Some even began to dream that maybe justice was possible again. Meanwhile, Judge Rohan grew restless. He noticed how the courtroom was changing. People who once entered with bowed heads now looked at Anya with respect. He disliked this shift of attention. He reminded himself that he had power, but inside he felt a small discomfort he had never known before. One evening, Mira and Anya sat outside their little house. The air was calm and the stars shone above. Mira asked her daughter if she was not afraid of the judge's arrogance. Anya smiled and replied that Truth was not afraid of anyone. She explained that her fight was not against one man alone, but against the unfairness that had controlled the town for years. Mira listened silently, her heart filled with pride and worry at the same time. Soon a case arrived that would change everything. It was bigger than any Anya had taken before. A group of villagers had lost their land in a dispute where Judge Rohan had sided with the wealthy landowners. They came to Anya desperate for someone to help them. For years, no one had dared to reopen the matter, but Anya agreed to take the case. She knew it would place her directly against Judge Rohan, but she did not step back. The news of this case spread quickly across the town. People whispered in markets, tea stalls, and outside homes. Some said it was foolish to challenge the judge. Others said it was the most courageous step anyone had taken in years. The air was filled with curiosity and tension. Judge Rohan himself heard of it and smiled with pride. He told his followers that he would show the young attorney her place. He believed she would tremble in front of him, like all others had before, but Anya was preparing with calm determination. She collected every document, studied every detail, and practiced her arguments until they were perfect. The day of the hearing drew closer. The courthouse, which had always been a place of fear, now became the center of attention. People waited to see what would happen when the maid's daughter stood face to face with the arrogant judge. The morning of the big case arrived. The courthouse, which usually felt heavy and silent, buzzed with whispers. People gathered outside long before the doors opened. Some stood on the steps, others filled the narrow lanes nearby. Everyone wanted to witness the moment when the maid's daughter, now an attorney, would face the powerful judge. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Clerks arranged files, lawyers prepared their notes, and villagers waited nervously. They had trusted Anya with their hopes, and now they watched her with anxious eyes. She sat calmly at her desk, dressed in her black coat, papers neatly stacked before her. Though her heart beat fast, her face showed quiet confidence. Judge Rohan entered the room with his usual pride. He adjusted his robe, lifted his chin, and looked around as if the place belonged only to him. His eyes briefly stopped at Anya, and he gave a small smile, half amused and half dismissive. In his mind, this day would prove that no young attorney, especially the daughter of a maid, could ever stand against him. The hearing began. The case was about a piece of land that the villagers had worked on for generations. Recently, wealthy landowners had claimed it as theirs, and Judge Rohan had ruled in their favor without proper proof. The villagers had lost their farms and their peace. They had nowhere else to turn until Anya agreed to represent them. Anya stood up and began to speak. Her voice was clear, steady, and respectful. She explained the history of the land, presenting old documents that showed the villagers had rightful ownership. She spoke of fairness, of how the law was meant to protect both the weak and the strong. Every sentence she delivered was backed by evidence. The people in the courtroom leaned forward to listen. They had never heard such a young voice carry so much strength. For the first time, many felt that truth was finally being spoken aloud in this hall where they had often felt ignored. Judge Rohan interrupted her several times, trying to shake her confidence. He asked tricky questions, raised his voice, and acted as though her arguments were unworthy. But Anya remained calm. She had prepared for this moment for weeks. Each time he questioned her, she responded with facts from the documents, with references from law books, and with examples that made her case stronger. Her calmness began to unsettle the judge. He was used to people stumbling when he raised his voice, but this young attorney did not lose her ground. The more he tried to weaken her, the more determined she appeared. The opposing lawyers, who represented the wealthy landowners, also tried to defend their side. They spoke of influence, past favors, and their close ties with the judge. But Anya reminded the court that justice was not about connections or status. It was about truth and fairness. She spoke directly to the spirit of the law, and her words carried weight. The villagers sitting in the back felt hope rising in their hearts. They exchanged glances, amazed at the courage of the young woman standing before them. Some even had tears in their eyes, remembering how powerless they had felt when the land was taken away. As the hearing continued, Anya presented witness statements, maps, and records. Every piece fit together like parts of a puzzle. Slowly, the courtroom began to see the picture clearly. The villagers had been wronged. Judge Rohan grew restless. He tapped his pen on the desk, shifted in his chair, and frowned deeply. For the first time in many years, he felt his control slipping. He realized that this was not an ordinary case. This was a challenge to his pride, and the challenger was someone he had always thought too small to matter. When Anya finished her arguments, the room was silent for a long moment. People could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. She stood tall, her eyes steady, showing no fear. The judge cleared his throat and announced that the hearing would continue the next day. He wanted time to review the documents and statements. But everyone in the room understood the truth. The maid's daughter had shaken the arrogant judge in his own court. As the villagers walked out, they gathered around Anya. They thanked her, blessed her, and told her that no matter what happened next, she had already given them courage. For the first time in years, they felt that justice was possible. That night in her small home, Mira hugged her daughter tightly. She whispered that she had never been prouder. Anya smiled and said this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring the real test, and she was ready. The town waited eagerly for the next hearing. Everyone knew that the final decision would not only be about land. It would decide whether truth could finally stand taller than arrogance in their town. The next day, the courtroom was filled to capacity. People had come from all over the town to see what would happen. The walls of the hall seemed smaller with the crowd pressing closer. Everyone whispered in excitement, yet a quiet respect hung in the air. They knew this was more than just a case about land. It was about fairness, truth, and courage. Judge Rohan entered the room with his usual pride, but there was a hint of tension in his steps. For the first time, he felt that he could not control the situation as easily as before. The young attorney, Anya, stood at her desk, papers arranged neatly, her black coat straight, her eyes focused. She greeted the judge politely, then turned to face the villagers who had entrusted their hopes to her. The hearing began. Anya started by calmly summarizing the events. She spoke about the villagers' connection to the land, showing documents, records, and maps to prove ownership. She explained that the previous ruling had ignored clear evidence and had favored the wealthy unfairly. Her words were clear and precise, and every sentence reflected careful thought and preparation. The judge tried to interrupt her. He raised his voice, asked challenging questions, and made comments to belittle her arguments. But Anya did not waver. She answered each question with facts, quoting the law and previous cases that supported her claims. Her confidence and clarity surprised everyone in the courtroom. Even the opposing lawyers had to listen carefully, realizing that they could not easily dismiss her points. As she continued, Anya asked the witnesses to speak. They told their stories calmly, explaining how the land had belonged to their families for generations and how they had been unfairly treated. Anya guided them patiently, helping them give their statements clearly. The villagers spoke honestly, and their voices, combined with Anya's words, created a strong picture of truth. Judge Rohan frowned more deeply with every point she made. He had expected her to falter, to show fear, but she remained steady and focused. He realized that her strength did not come from anger or arrogance, but from knowledge and fairness. She was not trying to attack him personally. She was only speaking the truth. The crowd in the courtroom watched closely. They felt hope rising in their hearts. Many whispered to each other, amazed that one person could speak so confidently and challenge the powerful judge without fear. Anya's presence seemed to lift a weight from the town. For years, people had accepted unfairness, but now they saw that it could be questioned. The hearing lasted for hours. Anya presented every piece of evidence carefully, connecting it to the law. She explained why the previous judgment had been unfair, and how the villagers had the right to their land. Her voice never trembled. She made her point simple, so everyone in the courtroom could understand, and at the same time precise enough to make the strongest case. When she finished, there was a long silence. Judge Rohan looked at her carefully, then at the villagers who waited for his decision. He could no longer dismiss the case with his usual pride. The truth was clear, and it had been presented with courage, intelligence, and respect. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quieter than usual. He acknowledged the evidence, and after reviewing the facts, he admitted that the previous ruling had been incomplete. He announced that the case would be reconsidered in favor of the villagers. Though it was not an outright apology, everyone understood that justice had begun to take its place. The villagers cheered quietly, holding back tears. They gathered around Anya, thanking her for speaking the truth and giving them courage. Mira, standing at the back, hugged her daughter tightly. She whispered that she had always believed in her, and now the whole town could see the strength and brilliance of the young woman she had raised. Anya smiled, not with pride, but with calm satisfaction. She had done what she had set out to do. She had stood for truth, fairness, and justice, even in front of the most arrogant judge the town had known. For the first time in many years, the courthouse felt different. It was no longer a place of fear. It was a place where courage, honesty, and knowledge could be recognized. And everyone in the town knew that the maid's daughter had changed something far greater than land. She had changed the spirit of justice itself. The days after the hearing were filled with anticipation. People in the town spoke quietly about what had happened in the courtroom. They had never imagined that a young woman could stand up to Judge Rohan and make him listen. Many of them came to Anya's small office, bringing small gifts, kind words, or simply stopping to say that they were proud of her. Anya continued her work calmly. She knew the case was not fully over yet. The judge had agreed to reconsider the ruling, but the final decision would come only after careful review. She spent hours checking every document, making notes, and preparing for the next day in court. She wanted to make sure that nothing could be left unclear. Judge Rohan, meanwhile, felt a quiet tension he had never known before. He had spent years believing that no one could challenge him, but now he realized that courage, knowledge, and truth could stand even against the weight of his power. He found himself thinking about Anya's words and the calm way she had presented her case. Though he did not admit it aloud, he respected her ability and precision. On the day of the final ruling, the courtroom was once again filled with people. The villagers who had lost their land were there, holding hands, their faces full of hope and nervousness. Others from the town had come, curious to see the outcome of the young attorney's fight. Everyone understood that this was more than just a legal decision. It was a test of fairness and courage. Anya entered the courtroom confidently. Her papers were organized, her notes clear, and her mind focused. She greeted the judge respectfully, then looked at the villagers who gave her encouraging smiles. She knew their hopes rested on her, but she also knew that the law, truth, and careful preparation were her strongest tools. The judge called the hearing to order. Anya summarized the case again, pointing out the facts, the documents, and the history that proved the villagers' rightful ownership of the land. She spoke clearly and calmly, showing how the previous decision had overlooked important evidence. She emphasized that justice was for everyone, regardless of wealth or position. Judge Rohan listened. He asked questions, but this time there was a difference. He did not interrupt angrily or try to belittle her. He seemed to consider each point carefully, perhaps realizing that truth could not be ignored. The villagers felt a quiet excitement. Even the air seemed different from the usual tension in the courthouse. After hours of review, Judge Rohan spoke. His voice was firm but not harsh. He acknowledged the documents, the witnesses, and the careful arguments that Anya had presented. Then he announced that the previous ruling had been corrected. The land rightfully belonged to the villagers. The decision was final. A wave of relief and happiness passed through the courtroom. The villagers held each other's hands, some with tears in their eyes. They looked at Anya with gratitude and admiration. She had not only fought for their land, but she had also restored hope and fairness in their hearts. Mira, standing behind her daughter, could not hold back her joy. She hugged Anya tightly, feeling proud and grateful. She whispered that her daughter had done what seemed impossible. Anya smiled gently, reminding her mother that their long journey, their struggles, and their faith had all led to this moment. Judge Rohan, for the first time, looked at someone with respect instead of pride. He realized that authority alone did not make a person great. True greatness came from knowledge, courage, and the willingness to stand for what is right. He had been challenged, and through that challenge, he had learned that even the smallest person, with the right heart and mind, could bring fairness into a world of arrogance. The townspeople left the courthouse with a sense of hope. They felt that justice was not only possible but achievable, and they knew that a young woman, once a maid's daughter, had changed the town forever. Anya returned home that evening. The streets of her small town seemed brighter than before. She walked alongside her mother, hand in hand, and smiled at the neighbors who waved to her. She knew that this victory was just the beginning. Many challenges might come in the future, but she also knew that courage, honesty, and dedication could overcome any obstacle. That night, under the quiet stars, Anya and Mira sat outside their home. Mira whispered that she had always believed in her daughter's dreams. Anya replied that dreams were only valuable if one worked hard for them. Together, they felt the satisfaction of a journey completed and the promise of a future filled with hope, fairness, and endless possibilities. The town had seen a change that day, and the story of the maid's daughter who faced the arrogant judge would be remembered for generations. It was a story of courage, determination, and the power of truth.